Hi, I'm Shannon Whiteside, Program Director for the Alveary, and I'm here today with a few of our curriculum developers, Carrie Forney, Catherine Avery, and Danielle Merritt-Sinceri. This is the ninth year of the Alveary, and we are so excited to give you a preview of some of the books we will be reading for the 24-25 school year. If you want to learn more about the Alveary, you can browse our view book, which is linked in the video description below. The viewbook also contains a free term of composer study lessons for you to try out. I want to reiterate that we are just highlighting some of the books that are part of our curriculum. There are many more. I also want to remind you that although the books are an important part of the lesson, there is more to a lesson plan than reading and narrating books. Mason talks about the four components of a lesson. Each lesson should begin with a recap of the previous lesson, then some kind of introduction to whet the appetite of the students or to give them some more context for what they're about to read, then the reading and narrating, followed by a short discussion. Our lesson plans provide those components to help you set up the lesson. Look at a map or ask a question to get students thinking about the topic. We also provide optional discussion questions and links to learn more.
Yeah, and we also wanted to say that you might find it helpful to take a minute to watch our videos on how we choose books. We cover questions that we ask ourselves when we decide books each year. So you have the background to understand our goals, but also so that you have the information you need to tailor the curriculum to your students. So we suggest you click over to those videos now, and we'll see you back here soon.
Great. So in this video, we're going to be talking about grades 1 to 3. So let's start with Bible. Charlotte Mason said that of the three sorts of knowledge proper to a child, the knowledge of God, of man, and of the universe, the knowledge of God ranks first in importance. It's indispensable and most happy-making. She didn't want the Bible lessons to be moralistic and children to feel like the Bible is a list of just do's and don'ts. But she wanted each Bible lesson to give new thoughts of God, new hopes of heaven. And when students are young, we want them to come to know God through his stories. Therefore, grades 1 to 6 read through selections of the Old Testament narratives and the Gospels. Then from 7th grade through high school, students read through the whole Bible chronologically with the aid of Bible resources and commentaries as appropriate.
We have our first graders begin with Hurlbut's Story of the Bible. This wonderful story Bible closely adheres to Scripture without embellishment or opinion. It sets a great foundation for understanding the overall story arc of the Bible. But if you want to just read the passage straight from the Bible, the verses are also provided. The second graders will read through the Old Testament and New Testament narrative selections. Basically, the stories they read in first grade in the Story Bible will now be read straight from the Bible. The New Testament readings will be selections from the Gospels following the life of Christ. We use the Bible timeline as a resource for students to review the stories they heard and visualize the chronological order. We also use an excellent resource for teachers and parents called the Bible Story Handbook by John and Kim Walton. Sometimes it's hard to know what the main idea of a narrative is. This book helps us to understand the biblical context, interpretational issues, and mistakes to avoid when reading specific Bible passages. This should be read beforehand as a way to prepare for the lessons, but you will want to use parts of it as you see fit to provide an introduction to a passage or a point of discussion after the reading. Third grade through sixth grade will have the same Bible lessons. They will read through the book of Genesis with the guidance of the book Herein is Love by Nancy Gantz. Nancy's purpose in this book falls nicely in line with Mason's purpose of not using the Bible as a rule book, but as a message of who God is and why we can trust him. This book is meant to be read aloud to students to highlight points in the passage and help them see the bigger picture of God's redemptive story. For New Testament, we are studying the book of Mark and using this book, a walking tour of the Gospels. The author guides students to a greater understanding of the places Jesus walked, taught, and performed his miracles. Through short descriptions of the places, color photos, and maps, this book will give students a better sense of the geography of the land of Israel and therefore help them understand the Bible better.
Shannon, I'm so excited about that new find as a book because there's so often we don't have a sense of what the Bible lands look like, or even any of that aspects of the geography of the place. So I'm really excited to see that one as part of the curriculum now.
Yeah, it's a really good find. It's not written for children, but it definitely is appropriate for children and just enough information and really great photos to help them understand how different it was in that time and place.
That's great.
Our Bible lessons will also include readings about men and women from church history, from the historical period we are studying. So next year we will be studying the time period of from the 800 to 1650 AD. But instead of assigning a particular book to read for each term, for grades 1 through 6, we are giving you some suggestions that you can choose from. Then you can read to multiple students at once and take it at your own pace. Here are a few of the books we suggest. We really like the fictionalized biographies of Louise Vernon because she makes the story come alive and feel like you were there. The Bible Smuggler is about William Tyndale, who risked his life to translate the Bible into English. Thunderstorm in the Church is about the Protestant reformer Martin Luther. And other books on our list include Cross Among the Tomahawks, which is the story of a Jesuit missionary who brought the message of Christ to the Hurons that lived in Canada.
I think that's such a cool way to show that history really is the pivot upon which the curriculum turns. Because if you're just looking at the history lessons, you wouldn't see that you're also reading more about the time period in church history, which I think is, just a cool connection that even in these early grades, they're getting that breadth across the whole curriculum. Okay, so let's look at geography now. So for first grade, we use selections from Mason's elementary geography book to provide, their edition, to provide students a foundation in concepts such as what makes day and night and the water cycle and understanding a globe. We have several shorter books as well that explain the concepts more in depth using pictures to aid comprehension. One example is The Reason for the Seasons, which provides simple explanations and great illustrations. We also incorporate map work into the lessons, beginning with the things close with the child's room or classroom or home or school, and then extending out to the yard or playground. And they also begin by first creating models before they move on to drawing maps. And then in second and third grade, we continue reading the book Cross Country, which is a great book to discuss geography concepts as it follows a family on a road trip from California to Washington, D.C. And to supplement the reading, we use the book 50 Adventures in the 50 States as a way to have different visuals for each of the different states. And we like it because it shows what activities you can do in each state based on the different geographical features, such as mountains or lakes, forests, or deserts. And then we've also incorporated some other books in the lessons as we talk about specific regions. For example, in third grade, we read Grandma Gatewood Hikes the Appalachian Trail. And this book tells the true story of a 67-year-old grandma who was the first woman to solo hike the Appalachian Trail. And there are great maps to follow along her journey so that students really feel like they've explored that part of the country.
And as we just said, right, history is the pivot upon which the curriculum turns. And it's important to remember that lots of the other aspects of the curriculum, as we just heard, contribute to the students' understanding of the times, especially as the students get older. So the books are obviously important, but the music and the art play a role as well, even in these early grades, and giving them that broader view of the time period. And also, just like Mason stressed, it's important to read history from multiple points of view, and that will be evident in the book choices. So Shannon, what are they going to be reading for history?
Our first graders always study pre-Columbian history, the history of the people who were already here before the US became a country in 1776. We begin the year reading The Very First Americans, which introduces various Native American tribes. Then we get into a little more depth with books about specific tribes. So here are a few of the books that first graders will read. Hiawatha and the Peacemaker. This story about peace and forgiveness was passed down to the authors, part of the Iroquois oral tradition. He tells how the Iroquois Nation tribes united together. And it's interesting to note that their method of governing later inspired the authors of the Constitution. Another book they will read is Moonstick, The Seasons of the Sioux by Eve Bunting. In a somewhat poetic manner, the author tells about a Sioux boy coming of age as each year is marked on his father's moon counting stick. The illustration in the text does a good job of capturing the tribe's way of life. So I really hope these students will enjoy learning about the different tribes. In the Alveary, there's a 4-year rotation for history. We have 3 strands of history: American, world, and ancient, with world and ancient added in 5th grade. Everyone from 2nd grade up is in the same time period. Next year, we are in our first rotation, which is 800 to 1650 AD. The 2nd and 3rd graders will only be studying US history. The United States was not a nation yet, so our study will read about the explorers who first came to America, the natives living in the land, and the first European colonists who came over to start a new life. The 2nd and 3rd graders will read 2 books that will serve as a brief overview of the time period and a point of connection for the other books they will read that focus on one event or one group of people. So these 2 books that will be the overview is Discovering the Americas and The New Americans, both by Betsy Maestro. These books have great maps, nice illustrations, and just the right amount of text for students who are new to history. We supplement these texts with a few other books that tell the story of a historical person or event. One of these books is Where Do You Think You're Going, Christopher Columbus by Jean Fritz. She has a humorous way of telling the story of history and portraying the historical figures as real people who had dreams, ideas, and challenges along the way. Our Canadian students in grades 2 through 4 will read The Great Adventure, an illustrated history of Canada for young people, and Turtle Island. Turtle Island, the story of North America's first people, does a great job of intertwining the history of the different tribes as well as the myths they told. It helps students see what life was like in America before the Europeans arrived.
I think that's so important just because for many people, I mean, we don't even think about the fact that there were people here before the Europeans came. So, it's really a fascinating look at, wait, what was going on? And there was a lot of years where there wasn't anyone else here yet. So, a very interesting book.
Yes, and every tribe was unique. And so this book will help students understand that.
So let's look at English and literature now. We've developed our own Alveary reading curriculum for grades 1 to 3 that incorporates copywork and dictation and more. And in the literature lessons, students build vocabulary and stretch their imagination as they listen to books aloud and start reading books themselves. There's a great quote in Home Education where Charlotte Mason casts a vision for literature lessons at this young age. She says, "Let them have tales of the imagination, scenes laid in other lands and other times, heroic adventures, hairbreadth escapes, delicious fairy tales in which they are never roughly pulled up by the impossible, even where all is impossible, and they know it and yet believe." So, Catherine, what do we have for literature?
Yeah, it's such a great quote. So following her lead, we have lots of tales starting off in first grade. So grade 1 students are reading books like Aesop's Fables and I think, oh yeah, there's Shane's got that one. And then they're reading Around the World in 80 Tales, which I just love the name of it. It's short tales from all over the place, and some beautiful illustrations. And then they're also reading Tales from Grimm by Wanda Gag, which is just a really beautiful rendition of Grimm's fairy tales. But the language is simple enough and the illustrations are pretty that it's a great book for students to start just exercising their reading muscles themselves and practicing reading on their own, or even just as part of the lesson. And then in grades 2 and 3, we read more myths in a wonder book, which is classic Greek myths. And they also read foundational English works like Pilgrim's Progress. And then we foster independence and just a love of reading with Charlotte's Web in grade 3. And then we're also using books like the National Geographic Book of Animal Poetry, which just has some really fun illustrations, and has poems from, poets from Robert Frost and Emily Dickinson to lesser known poets, just lots of different ones, but just these great illustrations and fun poems. And we're also reading some poems that are a little bit more tied to the time period, like this book, The Earth Under Sky Bear's Feet, which is a collection of Native American poems about the world around us. And it was illustrated by Thomas Locker. So just some beautiful illustrations, and just all of that to just help students learn to love words and sounds of words as they explore poetry in their daily readings.
And Thomas Locker's pictures and illustrations are so amazing. We've actually done them even just as picture studies by themselves. They're so beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's take a look at physical education and music. So for grades 1 through 3, we've got a variety of activities like singing games, folk dancing, which is my personal favorite. We've got competitive games and sports. We really like the John Ferreira Band books. We're using the Book of Playground Songs and Rhymes to teach rhythm and coordination through hand clapping games and jump rope rhymes. So those are lots of fun. We use the Book of Song Dances to learn simple dance moves. We also have video instruction for the dances. And then in music lessons, the grade 1 students build on those musical concepts with musical games. They're learning about all the different instruments in the orchestra and listen to beautiful and fun pieces of music like the Carnival of the Animals by Camille Saint-Saëns. Grades 2 through 12 study music that's connected to the historical time period for the year. So this year, the students will explore the sounds of early musical instruments from medieval and Renaissance times and listen to Renaissance composers like Thomas Tallis and the famous Johann Sebastian Bach. The last thing that we want to talk about here is life skills. So for the first graders, we have a course called Paper Folding for Beginners, and we provide video instruction for that. And then the first and second graders begin Sloyd using the book Paper Sloyd for primary grades. And we also provide video instruction for that as well. The first graders also get to begin learning how to sew using a book called Sewing Lessons that provides some really fun projects that are not too intimidating for them. The book continues through third grade as students work on 2 projects per term. Our handicraft next year for grades 2 through 12 will be learning stone carving techniques, clay modeling, and paper marbling. We follow Mason's model and do clay modeling every year for 1 term, and we use the book A Manual of Clay Modeling for that and have video instructions for many of those models as well. I'd like to move on to science and take a look at some of the books that we have for grades 1 through 3 there. In those grades 1 through 3, we have the students doing quite a bit of hands-on work during their lesson time, and we use a number of picture books to support that work and the relations that they're building through that work. So they begin with the idea of habitats in grade 1. And so we're reading books like Over and Under the Pond and Winter Sleep. So I've got a couple of those here. These are really lovely picture books that have beautiful illustrations. They're about a child taking a sweet excursion into a habitat with their caregiver and just noticing what there is to notice. And I just love those books. We also have books that bring attention to a particular creature in the habitat, like The Secret Life of Little Brown Bat. The artwork in this book is beautiful. The story gives us a different perspective to really help us think about these creatures. And then alongside these lessons, the first graders are also reading from book 1 of the Christian Liberty Readers. The reader's really nice because they get to read about the variety that there is in nature a little bit more methodically than they otherwise would by just using picture books. So that's great for our first graders to get going. In second grade, we zoom out a little bit and introduce the idea of biome. We want them to start with their own biome. So, for example, for my students, that would be a walk in the deciduous forest. But for another student, it might be something different. So there's a whole series of these books, and they start with whichever one is appropriate for them. And then throughout the year, we expand those ideas to other biomes, such as maybe the desert biome. This one's called Desert Giant. And then we also begin thinking about the relationships in those biomes. So for example, I have monarch and milkweed here to show you. This is another one that just has some really beautiful illustrations. Honestly, you could just spend the whole afternoon appreciating these illustrations. They're just gorgeous. And the story is great. It really helps call their attention to the relationships that they can see when they're out even just in their yard, wherever they're going for their walks. In second grade, we have them reading from book 3 in the Christian Liberty Nature Reader. The creatures that are presented in this book are really interesting and just bring a lot of a life and a lot of extra layers into the variety that they can see in their world and just to know what's out there, what God has created. In grade 3, we zoom out even further and begin thinking about ideas that make up ecosystem. So for example, North introduces us to not only a place that most of us have never seen, but also to the idea of seasonal migration. Buzztail and Leaper are other great stories for this level. You'll notice that we're increasing the reading level a bit here, and these stories bring in topics like life cycles and food chains to help us bring a lot more into this idea of ecosystem. Students in third grade are also continuing their work in the Christian Liberty Nature Reader with book 4.
I love, Danielle, how, that whole emphasis of just trying to understand where we live first, but also being captivated by this world that has so many interesting and amazing things, and we get to learn about them. And it's such a great blend of those two, where we're talking about what's right outside your window, but then what also is around the world, different places.
Yeah.
Well, so many great books. We hope you are excited for this next year. And thank you for joining us today for this preview. You can find more samples on our website and a free set of lesson plans and more information about the Alveary in our view book and on our YouTube channels. We are so excited for the adventures that await both teacher and student this next year. Thank you for listening.